Hey guys, and this is part 2 of the Tell Me When guide, and I'm going to show you another very useful thing here real quick, how to delete groups. We don't need all these groups for what I'm about to show you here, so to do that you just right click a group, scroll down to the group options and click delete. Simple as that. What we're going to be working on in this video is I'm going to repurpose this sample group here, as you see. I'm going to turn it into a rotation for retribution spec. Right now we only have these two groups, so we're going to have to do a few things here just to get ready. I'm going to go ahead and switch into ret spec, and we'll get started with this. Now, the way a rotation works is it's based on conditions. Icons can be set up to have very specific conditions in order to use. Now, if I wanted to get rid of this particular icon here, I could just go ahead and repurpose it and set it to condition. I could also just set it back to icon type and disable it in the top there, but instead I'm going to drag it off and I'm just going to delete the icon like you saw earlier. This is just the simplest way to get rid of icons you don't want. What I will do, however, is keep this consecration icon. Now, when it comes to spell conditions, they function a little differently than spell cooldowns and buffs and everything else. They don't natively have timers, so we don't really need to track a specific spell or anything like that. Instead, we can leave that there if you want to, or we can delete it. What we're going to do is click this drop box menu and I'll show you what I mean. We'll go to condition icon and the spell tracking disappears and leaves us with a question mark. Instead, you use a custom texture, and we can go ahead and type in Crusader Strike here, and now we're tracking Crusader Strike, or at least that's what we're going to track. We can turn off the timers because we don't need them anymore, and the way this works is when we set the conditions, when they pass, we want the icon to show, but when they fail, we don't. What this means is that the conditions we set are going to dictate what would cause this icon to appear on your screen, and that's very important. We're going to have to think about the logic behind why you use spells now, and the same applies for buffs and everything else. So you can click the conditions on the bottom tab there, and that'll take us to this page. To add a condition, you click this here, and you'll add a single condition, and it has a drop box. And from here you can choose from a whole list of different things. Right now, the most basic thing to track for Crusader Strike is obviously the spell cooldown. So you click that, and now we're tracking a cooldown. We'll type in this box exactly what we're looking for, in our case, Crusader Strike. And by clicking that, it'll appear in the box just like everything else. One other thing you'll see here is this is equals to 0 or usable. What this simply says is that the spell has to be off cooldown. If we set it to not equal, that means the spell has to be on cooldown. Or you can also choose less than, greater than, and all those other things. Right now it's less than 1 second, which means the spell cooldown has to be less than 1 second remaining for this icon's conditions to pass. You can also set it to less than 0, same thing. We are going to set it to equals usable, which means the spell is available for use. Another condition for Crusader Strike is you don't want to use it when you have max holy power. This can be done in a couple ways, but we're going to add another condition, resource tracking holy power. Right now it's set to equal 0, but we can turn this up all the way to 5. Now we could set this to not equals to 5, which would mean any number but 5, but let's say they add a 4% bonus or something and it increases our holy power. That would be bad. The better thing to do is set it to less than 5. Now it tracks everything under 5, but nothing over. That's very important because now it will never tell you when you're at 5 holy power to cast Crusader Strike. So our two conditions we set here, A, the spell is usable, and B, the spell you have less than 5 holy power. Those are the most basic terms for how to use Crusader Strike in any rotation. And if we go ahead and turn this into take this to a target dummy, we'll go ahead and show you how it works. Right now we have 0 holy power and the spell is usable. As soon as the spell is not usable, it'll disappear. Once it's back on cooldown or off cooldown, we can go ahead and use it again. And once we get to 5 holy power, even though the spell is available, you'll notice that it doesn't appear in the center of the screen. Simply put, it's telling you that this is not an opportune time to use the spell. You have max holy power. It would be a waste. If we use holy power by using Divine Storm, it appears back in the center, because now we can generate holy power. That's the most basic form of a condition icon. You can set up any other icon the same way, but you just have to think about how they're set up. Now we're going to try to make another condition icon here for Blade of Justice, and keep in mind these will track whatever talents you take and adjust accordingly. Again, we'll add a spell cooldown condition. This time we're tracking Blade of Blade of Wrath or Blade of Justice, and it has to equal usable. And just like before, we need to track how much holy power we have. Since Blade of Wrath tends to generate 2 holy power, we don't want to use it when we're at 4 holy power. So instead, we're going to go ahead and choose less than 4. This will make it so it'll show up at 0, 1, 2, or 3 holy power, but as soon as we hit 4, it's no longer ideal to cast the spell, as we'll overcap on holy power. Those again are the 2 most basic conditions for the spell. And if we go into the target dummy, you'll see both of these icons are available right now. That's because both of them are ideal to cast. We haven't set up any conditions in terms of priority, so they're just going to both show up in the center of the screen until you make a decision as to what you want to do. Now, we could go ahead and add a cooldown tracker for Crusader Strike, and that would make a priority right there for Blade of Wrath, but if there were more conditions on Crusader Strike, it would make it very difficult to replicate and do the opposite of them all. So instead, we're just going to right-click and drag this over here, and you'll see a new option, Add Icon is Shown Condition. What this does is it allows us to add a condition that says, by default, is the icon showing, which means have the conditions passed on that icon. If they have, then the icon will show. Now, what this is actually saying is, have the conditions for, is the spell usable? Yes. Are we less than 5 holy power? Yes. If the icon passes those, it will show, which means that we don't have to go ahead and put those conditions into this as well. But if we go ahead and click Hidden, now we're tracking the opposite. What we're saying now is Crusader Strike is not off cooldown, and we don't have less than 5 holy power. But because we're tracking holy power here, we can kind of just overlook that one. The more important thing is we're tracking the cooldown of Crusader Strike just by adding this one condition here. And I can show you that once we exit out, Blade of Wrath isn't showing anymore. Now, once we use 2 Crusader Strikes, it will show because it's usable, but once Crusader Strike comes off cooldown, it's back on the screen. That is the most basic way to make a rotation, and all the other conditions for Blade of Wrath will follow as normal. We have 4 holy power, which means we can't use it. If we had 3, it would show. And that's it. Now, we're going to go ahead and copy this over here, and we have another condition icon to make. This time, we're going to make it for Judgment. By copying a condition icon, we also copied over all of the conditions we set for it. So we can change a few things here. Number 1, we can change the cooldown to Judgment, since that's what we're tracking now. And Holy Power is important for us to track here as well, but we want to set it to equal 5, because that's the only time you really want to use Judgment. Now, we also want it to be a lower priority, and just for safety, I like adding icon is shown for everything that would be before it in the priority, just so it doesn't accidentally show up when we don't want it to. So, we have a 3-button priority list now: Crusader Strike, Blade of Justice, and Judgment. If we were to go ahead and close this up, you'll see that when we go into the target dummy, that's exactly what it would be. 2 Crusader Strikes, Blade of Justice, Crusader Strike, Judgment. Now, there is one other thing that we're missing here, and that would be our Holy Power Spender. Holy Power Spenders are a little different than these others since it doesn't actually have a cooldown. It tracks different conditions. So we'll copy this here and we'll set the icon to be Templar's Verdict. But when we go into the conditions, we can remove a few things because we don't actually need everything. Number 1, we definitely don't need a cooldown. There's no cooldown to track. The second thing we do need, though, is it has to equal 5 holy power. But the thing is that it can also equal 4 or 3. So while we could add a condition for holy power that equals 4 or 5 or 3 and all that thing, everything in between, the simpler thing to do is just change this condition from a holy power check to a spell is usable. This simply just says, can I use this spell? It should be by default enabled, but because of how we tinkered with it, it's by default not. We set it to Templar's Verdict. Now it's simply asking, can Templar's Verdict be used? Which means, do we have enough holy power for it? Or do we have a proc that would let it be used? Because of that, we also don't really need to track these 2 icons because they'll never actually overlap. So that's it. One other thing we want to track for a Holy Power Spender, because of how the class works, is a debuff, specifically Judgment. So we can go in here and track a debuff duration. We can go ahead and type in Judgment here. Now, it's not on us, it's on the target. So we'll switch that to target, and it's not absent, which means it's up. And we can also set this to cast by us. That way we don't get interference from other paladins who are also playing right now. And that's it. Now it's saying, is it usable? Yes. Is Judgment up? Yes, and it'll show Templar's Verdict. Now, you will notice here, though, once I use Judgment, there it is. And once I use Crusader Strike, there it is. And then once I use all these other things, there it is. But so is Crusader Strike. It's not because the priority is wrong, but it's because the conditions for when Templar's Verdict would be above it are no longer set. The simplest way to do that, again, just drag this over here, add icon is shown. Now we'll want to do this also for Blade of Wrath. Add icon is shown. And hell, we'll do it for Judgment as well, because you never know. Maybe Judgment's available, but we want to use Templar's Verdict right now. And we just have to go into each of these icons and set that to hidden. All that means is that the conditions no longer are there for Templar's Verdict. We can't use it. And if we go ahead and turn this off, as you'll see, we can go ahead and start a rotation, and now it actually looks like a rotation. It's telling you exactly what to use. And every time one icon shows up, no other icon shows up next to it. That's how we want this to be. We can add a billion other spells, but the ideal way to do this is to make it so that only one icon shows up, and that would be the one you set up to show up in that condition at that moment. You can add a few things to make it so they don't blink in and out, like changing it from is usable to less than a duration so that it's a little bit more advanced in how it predicts what you're going to do next, but that's it. Now, one thing you might notice is that I have the icons kind of showing up everywhere, and that's because the icons are shown by ID. That's how they're sorted. But by clicking here, we can change it to shown first. What this will do is, where the Crusader Strike icon is right now is the anchor. Any icon we have will display there now by changing it to shown icon first. It doesn't matter about IDs anymore, and makes it easier for us to position this on the screen in a more ideal place for us to follow it. Now, you've probably seen in my other videos that I had all these, rather than being horizontal, I make mine vertical. Simple reason for that is because I prefer them to be vertical. It's easier to position them. So that's what we'll do. We'll make and drag a new group over here. Remember, all the conditions are still set, and like I said, it's just easier to position. But when we go ahead and click this group and go to the group settings, one thing you're going to want to do is change the layout direction. We can have it the same way, shown icons first, but if we leave it like that, the top is where the anchor is. However, by clicking up, now the bottom is the anchor. And that's where the icons will appear. And we can just go ahead and move all these over here. They retain all their properties that we set up before, and we'll just delete this no longer useful group. And we'll call this group Rotation. And that's it. Now all the icons will show up on that bottom pillar, and you will see that no matter what happens, that's the only spot an icon will appear. We'll go through this rotation, 2 Crusader Strikes, a Blade of Justice, another Crusader Strike, and finish it off with a good Judgment and Templar's Verdict. And that's it. We made a rotation for Retribution. Now, if we were using guides that we found online or through other people, we could add more conditions to make it more consistent and add more spells and all that other stuff. But the basic principle follows. Figure out what would cause that spell to show up and add the conditions to meet those requirements. Now we can get into a few extra little details, a little bit of flair to make it so that things are a little more apparent, such as buff tracking and all these other things, and we'll do it through notifications. We've already set up the rotation, and we know these icons will show up when they're supposed to, but what if we actually want to track certain buffs or certain cooldowns and other things that aren't really important enough to put into the rotation? The simple way to do that is go and click the notifications bar here. We're going to go ahead and pretty much always choose an animation, and I personally like using while condition is set passing. This lets you set any number of conditions. The animation itself, activation border is a good one. That gets your attention, and I can show you that's what it looks like when it actually does trigger. Now, while conditions are set means we click here to add more conditions. This is separate from the other conditions. It's specific only for this notification that we just created. So, the condition I want to track right now is, did we get Divine Purpose? We'll track a buff. It's on us, and we're going to go ahead and type in this bar, Divine Purpose. Select it off the list here, and there we go. We want to set it to only cast by us and not absent, which means that the buff is up. Again, you could track specific timing, but that's all we want. And what this does now is, if we were to go up here and just attack this dummy, we'll take the Divine Purpose talent. That's probably a good start, but we'll go in, we'll attack the dummy, and when Divine Purpose procs, and that'll obviously make it so we can use Templar's Verdict, but now, unlike where before it would show up with Holy Power, we now know that the buff is active. There you go. Now the buff is highlighted. We know that that next cast is going to use Divine Purpose proc, and that's all you need to do. Simple as that. Just like the conditions before, just now it's not really showing an icon, it's adding on to it. Now we can enhance this even further. There's another ability that Paladins have called the Flames of Justice, or the Fires of Justice. We can go ahead and track that as well, and let's say we want it to also show. All we need to do is add another condition, another buff, called the Fires of Justice. We'll choose it off the list here, and again, it's not absent, which means it's up, and it's cast by us. Now, the thing here is that these icons are not really set up how we want them to be. We want either one of them to be up, so we'll change this "and" to an "or" just by clicking here. What this does is now either of these two conditions can be up, and if either of them are up, it'll make that notification pass. We can do the same thing for the conditions for the spell itself. We go here, we'll add a condition. Let's say we want to track when Divine Purpose is up, and we don't care if Judgment's up. We'll add a buff tracker for Divine Purpose, just like we did in the notification, set it to not absent and cast by us. But just by clicking "or" here, we have a problem. The problem here is that we're tracking the Judgment buff or the Divine Purpose buff. What we actually want to do is separate them. We can do this with brackets. We can click here to add a lower bracket and click here to add an upper bracket. Now everything in the brackets counts as one condition. They both have to succeed for it to pass, while this one outside the brackets is its own condition on its own. What we're actually doing here, just so I can explain it a little clearer, we have two conditions. They both have to pass. If both of them pass, it counts it within the brackets as a passed condition and lets the icon be shown. That is, Judgment's up and Templar's Verdict is usable. On the other hand, we added an "or" condition. That "or" condition says, if Divine Purpose is up and Judgment is no longer part of that factor, then the condition passes as well. So both of them can pass at the same time, or one can pass and the other fail, and the icon will still show up, like it does here. Right now, all of them are passing. We can use the spell and Judgment's up, but as soon as this fails, now, because we're no longer tracking Judgment with Divine Purpose, it still lets us use it. Alright guys, that's it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to show you one extra little bit of tracking and also how to import and export. So stay tuned for that, and I will catch you guys later.